In my quest to make a little extra money wherever I can, last week I decided to sell a couple of Christmas dresses that no longer fit my kids on Vinted. These cost around £40 when I bought them brand new, and they are in near pristine condition. But Vinted suggested to me that I should list them for just £3 each. Now I get that secondhand clothes are worth less, but it made me stop and think, why are clothes that cost good money basically worthless once we don't want them anymore? And the answer says a lot about fashion, secondhand apps like Vinted and eBay, and the way we think about clothes. So I want to talk about why I don't think that Vinted is necessarily the amazing side hustle or eco-friendly solution that a lot of people think it is, and why the reality is a lot more complicated. So kicking off with the first reason why I don't think Vinted is so great anymore, it's a buyer's market. The fast fashion industry churns out 100 billion garments a year. Yes, you heard me right, 100 billion. Here in the UK, it's estimated that the average person buys 28 new garments a year. That's basically a whole new wardrobe. And the thing with fast fashion is we don't even seem to have reached maximum speed yet. Fast fashion is accelerating. If we go back to the 2000s, brands would typically release around 2 seasonal collections per year. Today, we are seeing brand new garments put on the market on a weekly basis. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of them. And we've also seen the rise of ultra fast fashion retailers such as Shine, which are ramping up the production rates. By 2014, people were buying 60% more clothing, but keeping them for just half as long. And what does this mean for the secondhand market? It means that the buyer is absolutely flooded with choice. You may well have put that pretty dress on for £10, but chances are someone else is selling exactly the same thing for just £4.50. For buyers, this is absolutely fantastic, bargains everywhere. But for sellers, it means that the value of your clothes drops off a cliff the second that you've worn them just once. It's a little bit like buying a brand new car, which plummets in value the second you drive it off the forecourt. But this is worse because fast fashion trends move so fast. The things that were in style last summer and the items that were on the must-have list last summer are completely dated this summer. So even if it's been barely worn, the resale prices are low. And buyers absolutely know this. They scroll through apps like Vinted with the mindset that secondhand should equal cheap, no matter what the effort or quality that went into making the original garment. So what this means is that for your average seller who just wants to make a few quid from decluttering their old clothes, it leaves them wondering whether it's even worth the time and effort just to make a few quid. And now we're going to move on to one of the biggest myths circulating around the platform, and I'm going to call it the £1,000 myth. The idea that tons of people are easily making £1,000 a month from selling stuff on Vinted. And look, technically yes, some people are making that much money or even more from selling things on Vinted. But here's the catch. For a start, they're treating it like a job. This is not something you can do for 10 minutes a week. You have to take quality pictures. You have to respond to offers. You have to respond to questions. You have to package the item up. You have to get it to a post office or a delivery locker. These people are flipping hundreds, maybe even thousands of items a month in order to make this amount of money. This means that they are having to seek out stock all of the time, whether it be from the Vinted app itself, or from car boot sales, or from charity shops. While researching this video, I was really interested to find how easy it is to buy wholesale secondhand clothes, which presumably a lot of these resellers buy in bulk. They take a bit of a gamble on it and see if it's any good, and then list the items onto Vinted individually. There are a ton of secondhand wholesale clothing websites out there. And so the really obvious point to make here is that these people are treating it like a business. They are not like the average person clearing out their wardrobe. They cannot just make this money based on clearing out their own stuff. They're having to get stock in and then sell it on the app. And by the way, that means that they need to be paying tax on whatever they earn. And the final point I'd like to make on this, which really shocked me, is that some of them, not all of them, some of them are using bots. Yes, I had absolutely no idea about this. Let me know in the comments if you realized that this was going on, but people have bots that they hook into Vinted. They give it keywords for products to look for, and then the bot makes automatic offers on these items like the second that they are listed so that they can snap things up. They get the stuff in and then they resell it. But even this business model is not easy. Yes, the bot is doing the hard work of trawling Vinted for products for you in order to resell. However, they're having to take pictures, and more than that, they're having to take better pictures because they can't just buy the item and resell it. They have to resell it at a higher price. Therefore, they have to take much better pictures. They maybe have to give the item a bit of a clean, a bit of an iron in order to make it look look more appealing. And I'd also just like to add, what are these people's business costs? I've seen some of these Vinted bots and they have a monthly fee. I think one of them was £30 a month just to get access to the bot. Are these people being transparent about their income versus their business costs? Are they telling us how much they had to spend in order to make this amount of money? What is the profit margin? I'm willing to bet that for a lot of people, it's not particularly great. So obviously, if you're just selling your kids' old clothes, clothes that no longer fit you or clothes that you no longer want, you're not going to make anywhere near this amount of money. You only have to do quick maths to see that it doesn't really work out. If you're selling things for £5 to £10 a piece, you'd need to shift well over 100 items a month in order to hit that £1,000 target. And that is all before you account for other costs such as packaging and the time and cost for you to get to the actual place where you need to post the item. And kind of adjacent to this issue of transparency, I always think that whenever I see normal, non-resellers talking about how much money they made on Vinted, like say they say, oh, I made £300 this month selling my stuff on Vinted, I'm like, well, yeah, that's great that you've got that money, but how much money did you originally spend on all of that stuff? What you're really saying is that I sold hundreds of pounds worth of clothing for pennies on the pound. That £300 might sound really great until you realise that they may well have spent £900 or even more than £1,000 buying those clothes originally. So when you sell your stuff on Vinted, you're not actually making money, you're just clawing back some of what you spent. And I just think that this is something that's kind of framed slightly awkwardly around Vinted, and it's not really very clear. According to some research, the average household spends £900 a year on clothes. If you manage to claw back £300, you're still £600 down. So for normal non-resellers, the real profit is actually negative. Ultimately, you've lost hundreds, but when it comes back in dribs and drabs, it feels like a win. Just to be clear, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to sell on the stuff that you no longer need. It's actually a really good thing to not hoard loads of stuff that you're not using and to bring in a little bit of money to get some of that money that you spent back into your bank account. Clothes that your kids no longer fit into can go on to someone else and be loved by their children for a year or two. And also, if you're anything like me, like most of your friends are maybe already married, so you don't need tons of wedding guest outfits in your wardrobe. But I do think that Vinted has contributed to the issue of overconsumption. And this is the bit I feel like nobody talks about. Platforms like Vinted don't just solve the problem of waste. I think they can actually make it worse. On the surface, it feels good. I'm not throwing this away, I'm giving it a new lease of life. But here's the flip side to that. When you know that it's easy to flip clothes later, everything feels more disposable. It encourages wardrobe churn. Buy, wear once, sell cheap, repeat. And the really sad thing is that some stuff doesn't remain in circulation. Some stuff you can't shift because, as I said earlier, fast fashion means that those trends are moving so quickly. According to WRAP, the UK environmental charity, over 300,000 tons of clothing still ends up in landfill every single year. I watched this Netflix documentary earlier this year called Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy, and there was footage of unwanted clothes dumped in communities in Kenya and Ghana, and it was just awful. So while secondhand apps do help a bit, they're not fixing the underlying issue, which is overconsumption. Even worse, people are scrolling through Vinted in the way that they do fast fashion sites, hunting for a dopamine hit, grabbing bargains they don't really need because it feels guilt-free. Because it's secondhand, you assume this is sustainable. In truth, the carbon footprint doesn't disappear just because you're the secondhand owner. Producing that dress in the first place used up water, resources, and energy. And in fact, the fashion industry is responsible for around 10% of the global carbon emissions. That's more than all international flights and shipping combined. And it's worth remembering as well that packaging something up, driving it to a post office or to a delivery locker, that creates emissions. That is bad for the planet too. So what I'm saying is that when we're buying and flipping items constantly, the green story isn't quite so green. Moving on now, there's also the issue of quality. If we go back just a few decades, there was much more of a focus on clothes that were built to last. Solid denim, wool coats, leather boots. But with today's fast fashion, a £40 dress might not even last a few washes before it looks tired, or before the hems start to fray, or the seams start to split. And that makes resale even harder because buyers are picky and the choice is endless. So you end up with this wardrobe full of low quality clothing, and when you try to resell it, you realise how little these things are actually worth. I would also add, by the way, that I am in a group for Vinted buyers and sellers, and every single day there is a horror story about something that they bought and they were misled about the brand, the quality, the size, or the fit. It is quite shocking, some of the stories in there. Yes, Vinted does have safeguards in place for this kind of thing, but it's frustrating for the users. So is Vinted really terrible? Not exactly. Look, it is great for buyers who need to find a bargain. If you've got a large family, we know how quickly kids grow out of clothes. It can be a real lifesaver having those cheap deals easily to hand. And of course, it is better to resell your clothes than to chuck them into landfill. But we do need to be honest. For sellers, it's a buyer's market. Prices are low because fast fashion is flooding the marketplace. Those £1,000 a month earning claims are outliers, and there's more context to be had around those claims. Selling hundreds of pounds worth of clothes that you barely used for pennies is not a great budget win. And I think most importantly, it encourages us to keep buying because the safety net of Vinted makes everything feel more disposable. So what can be the alternative? If you're selling really high quality designer or much loved brands, you can try using rental platforms instead. This type of model can really slow down the churn of fashion. And if you still really want to make money on Vinted and you want to beat those people using bots trying to buy your stuff dirt cheap and sell it on for a profit, make sure that you take amazing quality pictures, make sure that you present the clothing in the best possible way, take pictures of the item from multiple angles, and maybe even try ignoring Vinted's pricing suggestion. I would also add, I think it really helps to be super detailed in your description. Vinted is also a search engine, so try and hit as many possible keywords as you can. If you're selling a Christmas party dress, make sure that Christmas party dress is in the description. Add in there the colors, add in there the size, add in there the quality, maybe add in there what kind of picture is on the dress, if there is any kind of pattern or picture. Be really, really detailed and specific. By doing this, people are more likely to find your item on the platform. But if anything, the real lesson here isn't about how to make more money on Vinted. It's buying less in the first place. That is where the true savings are. Thanks for sticking with me right to the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think of the Vinted platform? I personally think it's not as good as it was when I started on it a couple of years ago, but I really want to hear about what you think about the pricing and about the general vibe on the platform these days. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. I'd love to have you join the community here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.